Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila with a special story for you. Today, our story comes from Oregon, which is where I grew up, and it's down by the beach, which was one of my favorite places. And the students from Laurelwood Academy, which is a Christian academy there in Oregon, were there at Garibaldi on the Oregon beach. They were there because they were the senior students, and the seniors always got to go on a senior trip right before graduation. So here they were, Ken and Dan. They were out in the waves body surfing. Well, body surfing is where you just kind of lay on the waves and they carry you. Well, generally, people surf on a surfboard, but they didn't have any surfboards with them, so they were just body surfing. But the one thing about the Oregon coast that's different than other beaches is Oregon is known for how much rain it gets. It's a beautiful green state, but it rains a lot and it's often cloudy. You put the dampness of the rain, the sun being covered by the clouds, and it's cold there. And the water in the ocean, yes, I've been in that ocean water, not very deep, but it is cold. Well, Ken and Dan, they turned to each other and said, one more time, just a couple more waves we can catch. Maybe we can ride a wave to the shore. They were a fair distance out. Then they looked up and they saw Sharon, and she was far, far out in those waves where it was really deep. And they knew that she was going to be in trouble, and they started yelling, Sharon, Sharon, come back. It's too deep. Swim back. Well, just then there were several big waves that came, and they couldn't hear Sharon's answer. But then something else was going on. The name of our story was Devil Tide. Well, there is such a thing as a rip tide and a devil tide and an undertow. An undertow is where the water pulls you from the bottom along the sand. And those are bad, but they're not quite as bad as a rip tide. Now, rip tides, I won't go into all the stuff that causes them because they're not always in the same place. But with a rip tide, the current pulls from the top of the water, and it is a very strong pull. It's almost impossible to swim against, and it will pull you way out into the ocean. Well, the boys could feel it. They went, "Oh no, a devil tide!" But they were so far out themselves that, they weren't in real deep water. But the tide was so strong, pulling them out toward the ocean, that when they tried to swim against it to get to the beach, they just couldn't. They got pulled backwards and backwards and backwards. Finally, they just stopped. And Dan said, let's hold on to each other's hands. That way, if we get pulled out, we'll be together and maybe we can help each other. So that was what they did, and they were standing there. And then they saw two of the girls that had been out swimming, and they were rushing toward the shore. They weren't in nearly as far as Dan and Ken, and certainly not as far as Sharon. And so they were able to get through the water that wasn't real deep. And they started calling, "Sharon's stuck in the deep water. We need to help. Somebody's got to help." Well, then Ken and Dan, they could still see Sharon way out there. And then running by them into that current was Ben and Wayne. They yelled as they passed, "We gotta go help Sharon." That current caught them. And yes, they got way out to where Sharon was, but they realized that they couldn't fight back against that current. It was too strong, and all they could do was try to stay there, fighting against that current so it didn't pull them out to sea. Well, Ken and Dan, they still were trying to figure out what to do. They hadn't been able to see the shore for some time because the waves were getting bigger and they couldn't see over them. But then there was kind of a break in the waves and they could see something. There was a line of people, a chain of people, all of them holding each other's hands. A long, long line. Later, Dan and Ken were told there were 80 people in that human chain of people. They each held on tightly to each other. And then, of course, going in, except for trying to keep their feet under them, the current was pulling on them further and further in. As they went by Dan and Ken, they reached out and grabbed hold of them, and they were added to the chain. They knew that they were cold, but they didn't dare try to take them back. They had to get to the other three. Well, they kept working and working. It was hard work, even when they were going with that tide. It took them a long time. Ken couldn't remember how long it took for them. Pretty soon, that line, some of the people were still standing, but a lot of the people were way in deep water, and they were fighting to get themselves out. Well, finally, Ben had worked himself a small ways away from Sharon and Wayne, and that human chain of people reached out and they grabbed Ben and they put him in their chain of people. They moved a little closer and a little closer. Finally, Sharon was so bad she was semi-conscious. Wayne grabbed a hold of her and he pushed her into that human chain, and they grabbed a hold of her as well, putting her inside of the chain so they could keep her head above water as much as possible. Finally, Wayne was able to make his way to them, and he held on as well. Then the hard part, as if this wasn't hard enough, the hard part was that they had to go against that current now. And of course, by now they were all freezing cold, and the waves were bigger. The waves kept rushing over top of the human chain, and they did not dare let go. When the wave went out, they would cough and sputter, and they would keep going. They had to get out of that ocean. When the first person got to the beach, they didn't let go and go running. No, they held on to that chain and they kept pulling against that current until every single person in that 80-person chain was safely on shore. Well, they had to pick Sharon up. Before this happened, they had built a big fire. They were probably going to have lunch, maybe a wiener roast out there, I don't know. But they carried Sharon over by the fire. If she had been much longer, she would have no longer been with us. They wrapped her in a blanket, and she lay there on the sand by that warm fire, shaking. Ken and Dan couldn't hardly sit still. They were so cold. Ben and Wayne, he had been covered with so many waves that he had swallowed a whole bunch of seawater. And so he was really sick and throwing up seawater. That whole chain of people. There were some interesting things that they found out when they were safely on shore after they had thanked God for their deliverance. There were several of the people in that human chain that couldn't even swim, but they had agreed to risk their lives to try to help those kids. And boys and girls, have you ever gone with a big group of people somewhere, to the beach somewhere, or to a park? Do all 80 people stay in one place? Or do they wander off? If you're at the beach, some people like to just walk down the beach. Others like to get in the ocean and swim. But something amazing happened that day. All of those 80 people were in one group when those girls came rushing out of the ocean saying that Sharon was drowning. That's something that never happens. I think God kept them there because he knew they were going to be needed. Ken and Dan, when the shivers finally stopped and they were starting to get warm by that fire, they looked at each other and Dan said, God is so good. And do you know what that human chain, besides fighting that tide, had been doing? All 80 of those people have been praying their hearts out, as well as Ken and Dan. Dan, he said, only God could have done this. Ken looked at him and he said, yes, the power of God. Do you know, guys, he called to all the other seniors, this is the best senior present, the best senior class present that we're ever going to get for graduation. God saving us and giving all these people the courage to come into that riptide to save us from what other people called the devil tide. Thank you, boys and girls. I will see you next week. You have a good week now. And remember, God is with you.